Hey everybody, welcome back to Not Another Tooling Podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. How are you today, Matt?
I'm good. Weather's getting better, always changes things. So I might get a bit of a sweat on, but it's okay.
Do you know what? That's a really interesting point. I agree. Everybody is better when the sun comes out. But I read a really interesting study recently of somebody who had taken their young child out from when they were born. Whenever it rained, they took them out to play in the rain,
Nice.
to essentially change that.
Yeah.
So then the child got excited every time it rained.
That's
like,
brilliant.
Brilliant, it's raining. Great, this is amazing.
I like that a lot.
So,
that's good.
I think it's conditioning from early age. But anyway, today we are going to talk about the hackathon proof of value approach. So a little bit different. We've talked about POCs, POVs in the past. This is a different approach to that some companies are using, and there are times to use it and times not to use it. So Matt, do you want to give us an overview of what this approach is?
Yeah, in short, what it's trying to achieve is remove bullshit, create transparency, and understand the culture fit. That's what's happening in the background, outside of the normal things you'd expect from POV, POC, demo territory. But the more probably better way to explain it is it's an elongated demo where you are meeting requirements from the ground up versus coming prepared into those sessions. So it becomes a collaborative experience. And these aren't short. This could be anything from half a day to a day. Wouldn't really need to go over more than one day. Depends on what's happening. But it's all about getting the right people who will be consuming this solution in the room with the vendor who essentially build all these things in front of them.
That sounds like a very sensible way to go, really, because there are definitely some interesting I've seen and heard many stories of people doing lots of work behind the scenes and then it looking magic, even though it took them 4 weeks of solid effort to get to that. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors involved. So this sounds like a good way. So when would be a good situation to take this approach? Or do you think you could always do this approach?
You know what, I mean, having been more involved in it lately, I would find it hard for this not to be a sensible approach. There are considerations around time. That is the biggest constraint in this, but it's giving you the opportunity to see through that veneer of just a feature-rich solution. Like, why wouldn't you go for this scenario? Certainly for some product stacks, not all capabilities, but if you're going to be stuck being a nice word in this sense, if you're going to be stuck with a solution for 3-5 years, this small bit of time investment up front will pay dividends. So yeah, to answer your question, I would see hard not to suggest this unless that time constraint was very, very urgent. I'm talking they need to be turning around procurement and commercials within a couple of weeks or so. That maybe this wouldn't necessarily be an obvious thing to do, but should certainly be considered.
Okay. So my thinking is I can see it for certain technologies. So something like ITSM, for example.
Yeah.
I think it could fit really well there because you're essentially just looking at that platform and that platform's capabilities. Whereas if you were looking at something like discovery or monitoring, those event correlation or those kind of things, you're very reliant on the vendor having the available technologies, right? Most vendors don't have the available technologies, right? They have a snapshot of all the all the usual stuff, but not loads and loads of different stuff. Or you're reliant on connecting into a customer system, which then is essentially doing a POC. I think. However, I think there is still a place for it because what you would want a vendor to turn up with is your use cases being spot on and saying, regardless of the technologies, show us how you would set up and get to, for example, automating an incident management process whereby you show us what the CI is, what the affected service is, and you automatically collect all the triage data we would need. So I think it's doable, but it would come back to the use cases, which is the same with ITSM, right? I think for this to be successful, you would have to be very clear on what the outcomes are that you want to see and have them well documented, so that everybody is clear what we're after in these. And it's not just, okay, great, you've got a lovely widget. It's, that's what's going to be relevant to our organization in helping us move the needle forward.
100% agree. So the bit before doing this, hence why the time sensitivity could be an issue, is pretty solid and clear requirements. What do you need to achieve? What is the outcome? That needs to exist. So the bit more recently is you'll have a list of things, which could be widget, features, functions, tick in the boxes, whatever. But then this sort of hackathon / demo or whatever, tech spike, whatever the word would want to be, needs to be sort of drawn out. So there's like a story taking place, an activity, a flow of something going through a system, which ultimately would encompass several tens of requirements, depending on the volume of them being captured. But just to the point you mentioned, there are external data factors. So that is a limitation when you essentially do not want to plug in the vendor into your estate for whatever reason. So there needs to be concessions when that might take place. For example, show me how you pull users in from Azure. Well, you're not going to touch our one. So what can we do to do some steps to emulate it being a real scenario, including, which I think is still fine, the idea of flat files. So when we look at integrations, for example, which is always the most complex one, could be event information, could be monitoring data, could be CI, wherever it is. In these scenarios, these were use case active scenarios. If there isn't data available at source in whatever systems, it's okay for it to be a flat file, pre-configure flat file. This is what we need to do, because you're still able to demonstrate the flow. It's just not as real, but as long as you can see it, because I suppose what I'm looking for in these exercises isn't just functionally. You want to see how it's being done. Like you mentioned around the sort of in the background, an army of people doing stuff. Have had the scenario on the vendors list that can do all these things. Okay, great. How do you do that? Oh, well, we can only do that far, but how can you do the rest of it? Oh, we've got an offshore team that can do that development for us. So it becomes a vendor-based development when you said you can do it on the box. Well, it's not quite. So this is able to tease out that sort of stuff. And in order for you to do that, you do have to make concessions, because you're not going to plug them into your estate.
Yes, I agree. And I think there is another really good benefit to this, which is if you could do this in conjunction with a reference call with another of those vendors' customers, you could get away without doing an on-site or a full-blown connected POC. I believe I always think a POC is a crazy thing to do, but yeah, almost every customer does one, because they say, oh, our environment is different to everybody else's. No, it's not. It's no different, right? It's a Cisco switch, it's VMware, it's, you've got some users that are going through an ITSM process, whatever the tech stack is, it's very similar. So if you could get away with doing a half or a full day use case demo where they a vendor proves that they can meet the requirements to move the needle on your stuff, and then you go talk to another customer or two of theirs that have done it live in production, think how much quicker your evaluation process would be, instead of having 2 to 3 week POCs times a couple of vendors, all the prep and whatever out of it. It means you could get to the benefits that you were hoping for when you started this process really super quick instead of over several months.
Agree. And when you're down in those normal routes of the BOCs and over a few weeks and whatever it might be, like there's so much like what's the right word I want to use? Orchestration taking place. It's a show. It's very much structured, and there's time to make it look better than it actually is. Versus when you're in that literally a room, physical room, there is very little elbow room for smoke and mirrors. It has to be what it is. And that's like really worthwhile and a valuable nugget, because in the real world, after you've deployed and the vendor or whoever's deployed, it's all done and dusted. You've got to deal with it like in the real world. And if you have an expectation it's all going to go great because the demos and all the sessions were just great, you're instantly going to have a lot of people that are pissed off because it isn't that great and there's a problem here. Versus if you're in that room setting, you're going through it, some things might not be able to be done, but you'll begin to understand how the vendor might go about troubleshooting that and working it out and fixing things. And that itself is like really valuable operational data for you to understand how you're going to run with it as well. So loads of nuggets you can gain from it to make it real.
Yeah, I think it always that it could also feed into another of your favorite points about investing properly in that product after the initial implementation, because you'll start to see, oh, we're going to need some extra support here potentially. Actually, it's not all out of the box, as nothing is really completely out of the box, right? Oh, we are going to need some help to do this, and maybe that bit's going to take a bit more time than we thought, and things like that, which might pre-purchase get you thinking, we should spend a little bit more on here, while we've got the ability to ask for more budget, instead of going back in 9 months' time and saying, oh, we need some more help to do this, which is always harder, I think, to do. So that's a really good point. So yeah, I like this approach. And in fact, I've done it recently successfully with a customer. It's just got me thinking about that, actually, in the UK, and they were very much after a full-blown POC, but they had some project deadlines that they had to meet. They had a renewal coming up with a vendor that was crazy money, and they were trying to save some money. So we said, well, why don't we just come in for a day and let's just do it hands-on, and you guys can join us, get hands-on keyboards if you want. We'll show you exactly how we do X, Y, and Z. And it worked really well. And most of the other vendors wanted to do a full-on POC.
Yeah, it's following the structured process, and that's a really good scenario. Like I mentioned about culture, and we've talked about culture being important, so these big relationships being like a good factor to sort of pivot around. You see very quickly what that culture is like. How far can they bend the product? Well, the product doesn't really do this, but we could try this. Or they're saying it just can't happen. It doesn't happen. Yeah. Like, you understand a little bit of the culture of the business you're going to be working with, because it could be a long-term relationship, very quickly in those settings, because there's no space to sort of move. There's no manager to go and ask for approval. It's just like a really transparent space, I would say.
Good. I'm trying to think where else.
I just touch on one scenario you mentioned around like it's definitely harder to do this with real information, real data, depending on. But if there's the appetite for it in the business, with them, it couldn't, maybe not production environments, but some environments having real world, like fast turnaround POVs in this sort of setting achieves the same outcome. So if you've got access to some sort of non-production environment, or depending on production, depends on the product, I suppose, where this could exist in that state and you could rattle through, it would work. And the scenario I'm trying to think about is I was trying to deploy a discovery product globally years ago, this was, and generally getting pockets of resistance and stuff. It can't really work. It doesn't really work. So like we didn't plan to do it there and then in the workshop, because it was a data gathering exercise workshop, ready to plan. So well, it's like takes 10 minutes to install the solution. Here's the download. I was like, okay, went for a coffee break, came back, started to deploy. started to do discovery, and then within an hour or two, because it's the nature of it, we had the right level of credentials mined, which is also a problem with discovery. We got a huge proportion of their data center inventory there in front of them, in their face. So it was irrefutable then. You can't argue with the flexibility of the product because we did it. Arguably, it took longer to go backwards and do documentation and the normal designs and stuff like that. So if you can do it on real stuff, albeit non-production most of the time, then even better. But the goal is still achieved even if you don't have real data, because you're looking for the functional and cultural fit of this particular product and the vendor associated to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Wonderful. Okay. All right. So we've talked about the hackathon proof of value approach today. We started with what is it? A really simple way to prove that it's a good fit for you and remove some of the BS in the background, etc. By doing what's essentially an elongated demo for half to 1 day, where the vendor comes in and builds from the ground up their solution in front of you, so that you can see how it's built, and they prove out the use cases that you have very clearly defined beforehand, and they prove that they can help you move the needle on these things. You bring in the consumers so that they start to see warts and all what the product is like, and they understand where the potential limitations are over other in the product, so that they may need more services or whatever it is. No product is perfect, and this way you get to see that in a very short period of time, which enables you to, if you did this with, you could do this with 3 or 4 vendors, right, in a week, combined with a couple of customer reference calls. It means in a couple of weeks you could have all of your evaluations done, rather than typically these might take a couple of months to do a full-blown POC, which means the benefit you were hoping to get out of a solution you can bring forward by those couple of months, and bring obviously more value to the business than when doing a long drawn out POC. Have I summarised that well?
You have. I've got one more thing. Apologies. So a great success factor, and you've got to engineer it in order to try and get the success factor out, is the customer side people, whoever's going to be responsible for this kind of solution long term, is then actually executing use cases and requirements in that session at some point or at the end. Because a lot of products claim to be easy and simple and whatever else, but then when you get into the hood, it's not. So if you have whoever your designated person will be operating long term, or people's, because it could be multiple, if they're able to begin to execute the scenarios or requirements in the session, great level of success.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Agree. Yeah. If somebody can do something, one of those tasks themselves, that's absolutely ideal. So yeah, good stuff. Right, wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. As always, if you have some topics you want to cover, please let us know. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, please do let us know. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time. Take care.